Sam and Robbie, my two children, are identical. Their age is 6 years. We were residing in our previous home a year ago, but we had to move because of an incident. It's a terrible long story. I spent 4 years living in my previous home. While I was residing there, my wife Carol and I were married, and we also raised our children there. Even though the area was gradually deteriorating, our initial aim was to remain in that house for as long as possible. We lived in a corner house up until this point, and the house across the street from us was hidden by a large clump of shrubs and trees. Thus, we didn't often see those neighbors, the one on the right. But Steve was his name. It was less than a year ago that he had moved there. I had only had a few conversations with him overall. His strong accent made it difficult for me to understand what he was saying, and he didn't seem like the friendliest guy in general. Even though there wasn't much privacy, the 2 rooms where his windows were located had a view of our backyard. In each of them, I had never seen the lights turned on. Therefore, I've always imagined that it's an abandoned guest room or something like. Sam and Robbie were playing with their water cannons and in their blow-up pool in the backyard one summer day. When I was working in the yard outside, I was headed towards the detached garage when I briefly caught sight of Steve next door at his window. It was only a brief glimpse. It was only when he saw him that he turned and moved away from the window. Yes, it was a little strange, but I still left. Later that day, when the kids were left alone and the sun was setting, they went back outdoors to play. The day was really hot, so Carol and I were in the kitchen, and they got back in their blow-up pool. The children's giggling stopped while she was preparing dinner, and then all of a sudden Robbie entered the house and reported that there was a flashing light coming from the neighbor's window. To get him to show me what he was talking about, I had to accompany him into the backyard. He mentioned that there was a white light that continuously came from one of Steve's upstairs windows that viewed the backyard. I asked the twins if it appeared to be a camera flash, assuming the worst. Yes, both of them replied. It's time to dry off and come inside, I told them. After assisting them in drying themselves, I carried them inside and went to inform Carol of what had happened. Like me, she immediately assumed the worst. I should go next door and knock on Steve's door, she suggested. Thus, I did, but at that moment, he never came to answer the door. He even had his car in the driveway, so he needed to be at home. Following several efforts to ring and knock on the bell, having given up, I returned home. I informed Carol that he was not communicating, which added credence to the children's statements. Even so, we were unable to demonstrate that the children's white light was caused by a camera flash. It sounded exactly like that, and hearing about it from somewhere in the past was worrying. Even that night, weeks before, when Carol and I were sharing a bedroom, outside, we could hear our side gate being silently opened and closed. Carol asked that I head outside to check. I turned on all of the lights and went outside to look around. I looked everywhere, but I couldn't find anything. And then I saw that Steve's backyard lights were on. When he approached the fence from the other side and inquired if I needed anything, I almost sprang out of my skin as I crossed it to have a peek at his yard. I inquired whether he had heard or seen someone skulking around our yard. No, he replied. During this moment, I also asked him directly if he had happened to be monitoring my children. They believed that someone was photographing them having fun in the pool via his window. He gave this a rather doubtful look. When I asked, he was quite irritated and practically yelled at me for making the same unfounded claim twice. I didn't want to cause a fight with a neighbor, therefore I couldn't. I returned inside after saying my sorry. This did not please Carol, who called him a liar. Not until a few weeks later did the second occurrence occur. This time, it happened while we were asleep in the middle of the night. Carol shook me when I woke up, obviously panicked. I was initially perplexed as I looked around the room, but as soon as I heard the kids crying in their room, I leaped off the bed and dashed downstairs. A few seconds later, I discovered that Robbie had awakened up Sammy, who was also wailing and screaming in response to him. Robbie was awake and weeping. A moment ago, according to Robbie, there was someone outside the window and a camera flash coming from it. Not only did I have shivers, but my blood started to boil. All I could ask myself was, how did he look? He claimed not to have seen it. I took the children up to our room so we could both sleep in the bed with the lights off. I glanced out the window of our bedroom and saw Steve's darkly illuminated home next door. I located him by looking out each window in his house. He was in that same room, looking out the upstairs windows that overlooked the backyard. As I barged out the next door and must have rung his doorbell 15 times, but he never came inside. To report Steve to the police, I did make a call. In this manner, perhaps the police department might investigate him in the event that additional people made reports about him in the future. I didn't see him once more. I used to wait to see him outside by sitting out front sometimes. However, he would obviously stay indoors when I was outside. As a result, we relocated to a new home in a different but adjacent town in less than a month. This is shown to be a superior location for raising children. In any case, I moved into an apartment with 2 other women around 3 months ago. In order for me to go to college, a list of components makes up the building. Our living conditions aren't that fantastic either. For instance, the majority of apartment rooms face the hallway, where residents of the same floor frequently cross paths to enter or exit the building. You can see into your room if you keep your windows open, but since I live with girls at college and most of the neighbors are kind, that's not a big deal. I'm not very bothered by anything on the list. As I was getting ready for bed a few nights ago, I heard music coming from somewhere. It was primarily pop music from the 2000s. As our city, the Lakes, is student-friendly and home to many fraternity homes, I didn't give it much consideration. Perhaps it was coming from one of the many parties that were going on, or maybe it was just some buddies who were too inebriated to be listening to music outside. I turned on a random video on my phone and went to bed, so I could go to sleep like I always do, but I was about to nod off. First, I heard sounds like drilling. I paused the video and paid great attention, initially thinking that I was just tired and hearing things, or that perhaps it was coming from my phone. Somewhere nearby, there was undoubtedly someone operating a drill. I stood up and took a bewildered look around the apartment. Approximately 11:00 p.m., therefore, it was impossible for someone to be at work, but the noise outside my bedroom window was even louder. When I opened it to investigate, I soon discovered that it was coming from the flat next door, the one that is currently nearest my window. I discovered that no one actually resides in the particular flat where the music was coming from. My bewilderment only deepened until I realized that perhaps someone had intended to rent it. I discussed this with the landlord, who gave the order to fix things. Even still, it felt incredibly weird that they were working on it so late on a Thursday. They continued to make noise even after I tried to go back to sleep. I started complaining about it to my friend over text, sending him videos and even audios of the window where all the noise was coming from. He told me that it was not legal for anyone to be doing this and that I should call the police. I declined, especially since it was in an apartment complex. I forced myself to fall asleep through the sounds of the drilling because all I wanted was to get some sleep, and by then it was beyond midnight. However, I woke up again a little after 1:00 in the morning. This time, I'm pressing home the notion that I'm stressed out, but not enough to act just yet. I went back to sleep, but I woke up again. I didn't even check the time this time. I simply put on a robe and went to confront whoever it was because I was so tired of them. The apartment's window was open. Since the window was above the steps, I made the decision to speak with those people from there. I would therefore need to descend a short set of stairs in order to enter view, and from there I would appear even shorter. But as soon as I reached the window, that was the last thought on my mind. In that room, I felt most of my courage evaporate. 4 men, who appeared to be in their 30s or 40s, paused what they were doing to give me a quick look. Now the radio was playing simply the song, and it was strangely comforting to have all the other sounds turned off. So suddenly, because, while that's all I had desired those few seconds earlier, I most certainly did not want to be the one thing these four men were thinking about while I was preoccupied with something else that worried me. It just felt unsettling to know that middle-aged guys were listening to music that would normally be associated with teenagers or even preteens until the next day, when those men's strange musical choices became apparent. In any case, none of them appeared surprised to see me. They were simply perplexed by how that looked and remembered why I had come in the first place. I apologize. I know it's late, and most of the individuals here have early shifts. Could you guys please try again at another time, if this is not too much to ask? It should be noted that, at the age of 19, I am quite small and frail, and I never gave wearing anything more than a robe a second thought. Thus, as those two men, who appeared to be in their 40s, approached the window, they loomed over me, peering up and down at my physique with a predatory air. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I froze. Both of them were perspiring, their mouths were open, and one of them had a hammer that appeared to be fairly hefty. They began to smile in a strange, twisted way, and I suddenly felt really queasy and wanted to puke. I began to cautiously return to my flat, keeping a close eye on the men in case they attempted to seize me. I was out of their line of sight as soon as I reached the top step of the stairs and went close enough to the window. I hurried to my front door, opened it, and secured it. I assumed the other female, who stays with me, was asleep as the other one was out of town that evening. I asked them via our group chat if anyone had moved into that apartment, but she hadn't seen it. When I returned to my room, I could actually hear nothing but the sound of the radio being switched off. It was unclear to me how I should react to that. I was disgusted and freaked out instead of outraged now. Even though I knew I should have called the police by then, I was simply too anxious to bother with checking the time any longer. It was now somewhat after 2 o'clock. I tricked myself into thinking as I got back into bed. I just wanted to sleep. I wasn't afraid. I finally fainted and woke up in the middle of the night once more. It was almost 3:30 this time, and there were no noises coming from the apartment. All was silent, and that soon began to get on my nerves. It had to have been something I heard or felt, because it was too quiet for me to wake awake. I felt nervous in the silence, and I thought maybe there was someone on the other side of my shuttered window. I made an effort not to think about it, but I was unable to sleep soundly after that. When I was leaving the following morning, when I passed by that same window, I saw it was closed. I asked the girl who was at home with me, but it felt like it had never even happened the night before. She claimed to have woken up multiple times during the night, but her sleep paralysis prevented her from getting up and doing action, so that was confirmed if she had heard anything. I didn't think those folks weren't real, but how could they have? Why did it appear like the keys to the building were in that apartment? It's been a week now, and thankfully, they didn't want to be seen during the day. What were they thinking of doing to me or maybe any other passerby? Those men are no longer in my life. I honestly can't even bear to consider the prospect that they were who they said they were or what they were doing, since I still don't know. They could still be out there or make a reappearance. My residence is in a modest suburban community located on Long Island, New York. I recently started renting a tiny house that is ideal for 2 to 4 people with my girlfriend Sarah. Our house is on a quiet block, and we have a good-sized backyard. The county refers to the area on one side of our property as the water drainage basin, which is just a group of trees encircling a sump. Our neighbor Kyle and his spouse reside on the opposite side. They are calm and in their 60s, a little older. Other than the house directly behind us over the fence, Kyle's house is blocked off from view by some bushes that the landlord planted years ago. Nevertheless, that one house looking into our backyard was all it took for Sarah and I to feel truly uncomfortable. Since it's fall as I write this, we've been cleaning up the front and backyard for the previous few weeks. I noticed that whenever we were outside, these two people were always standing at the house's upstairs window behind us. A middle-aged man and wife were there. They would continue to stare and observe me when I would look up to that window. We could barely bear to pretend not to notice it because it was getting so unpleasant, but we could only bear it for so long. Day by day, the leaves continued to fall, necessitating more fall cleanup. Sarah would no longer desire to be in the yard because she was starting to feel really uneasy around those two individuals who would constantly watch us out the window. So, while raking one misty day, I glanced up at the window and saw the two standing at the large rectangular window once more. After they smiled and waved for a few seconds, I decided to wave at them to see if they would wave back. They didn't respond or move, but I could feel their steps and see where their eyes were fixed on me. I attempted to keep raking even after turning my back on the window, but I glanced back. Upon returning a few minutes later, they were still there. I was too uncomfortable and strange to be outside. Sarah replied, "We should go over and introduce ourselves," as I entered the building. I was apprehensive to do that at first, but she convinced me to accompany her on a block walk to that house and ring the bell. The door broke open just enough to see half of a person's head, but we weren't expecting one of those folks at the window to answer. Neither of the people who were continually at the window looked like that. Moreover, the house was so dark that it appeared eerily foreboding and unsettling to be staring at half of that person's face. This man appeared much younger, perhaps in his 20s. Sarah and I made an effort to introduce ourselves and be cordial, but the guy didn't seem to want to talk and appeared to be very closed off. When I questioned him if he lives with anyone else here, such as his parents, he answered with a very "what you need" attitude. "No," he said. I mentioned the guy on the other side of the door and the man and woman who were at the upstairs window all the time. Said he had no idea who I was referring to, Sarah, and I became quite uneasy. We simply departed, but as we returned to the sidewalk along the walkway, something seemed off. The man behind the door was still able to see half of his face through the slightly ajar door, as I saw. He must have watched us go till we were no longer visible. When we arrived home, the interaction seemed even stranger and more unsettling than we had anticipated. I walked to our room upstairs. Only our master bedroom and the bathroom, which has 2 windows, are located upstairs in our home. I noticed that the 2 individuals were once again staring out of one of the windows, which faces the house across the fence. Despite their distance, it seemed as though they were directly addressing me. After closing the blinds, I descended to inform Sarah. We both decided it was time to put in some arbites to hide their window. The only issue is that fall has arrived, and there is no longer time to plant any kind of tree. After staring outside for a few days, we have to survive the cold. The window in the bedroom, or spending a night in the backyard. Something knocked strangely from downstairs. Sarah was told to wait in bed while I down the stairs. The sound of knocking became more insistent, and I soon realized it was not coming from one of the doors, but rather from the glass. Naturally, we closed the curtains on one of the backyard windows since we didn't want those eerie folks to be able to see into our living room at night. When I got up close, it was definitely a fist rapping on the glass. I was too afraid and froze before I could say who was there. Rather, I turned on the light in the backyard, which caused the knocking to stop. I was not even interested in peering out the door or window. I told Sarah about the eerie banging while keeping the light on and making the excuse that I had chased the intruder away. I overstated so as not to come across as a coward. I also wanted her to be worry-free. I think it had something to do with that house, both of us. Even though not much has transpired lately, I will still need to provide updates during the winter. We haven't seen those folks at the window in the past 2 weeks, but yesterday night we heard screaming and yelling coming from that house. I had to open our window to see that muffled cries were emanating from that residence. It only serves to highlight how loud the yelling was that we were able to hear it through 2 sets of closed windows. Then it abruptly ceased and became silent. We debated calling the cops, but eventually decided against it. We're starting to get quite spooked out here, but I'll report again if anything more occurs.